Picture this. You're living way back in the 80s. I know that's going to be hard to imagine since no one's old enough to be alive from all the way back then. No, I don't mean these 80s. I mean 80, as in 80, the year. Not 1980, not 1880, not 980, 80, as in the first century, as in the Iron Age. As in the ancient Moai statues on Easter Island built by the Rapa Nui people are 1,000 years in the future.
Future!
Yeah, this was a while ago. So imagine you're serving under Roman Emperor Trajan in the army.
Trajan.
Casually subjugating people to the north of Italy on your conquest, putting down local uprisings in the territory that Julius Caesar had only just added to the Roman Empire a few decades prior. And of course, all the while, destroying the native people's way of life and culture, replacing their religion and language with ours, forcing dozens of warring tribes together under the banner of one country, will in absolutely no way give the people of this particular island chain any ideas going forward in history. Anyway, continuing to imagine that you're a soldier in the late 1st century AD. Imagine you were given the task of providing food for the recently built city of Ariolate, Gaul, today called Arles, France. As in the whole city. The city of 12,500 people. It's interesting, at the height of the Roman Empire, they had about 60 million people, very similar to the population of just the country of Italy itself today. No country before or for a very long time after came anywhere close to the population of ancient Rome. So of course they had to come up with new and inventive ways to feed massive populations of people, because cities had never gotten as big before in history as they did at the height of the Roman Empire. And the result? Well, this is Barbegal. The single most impressive piece of Roman engineering, and in my opinion, the greatest triumph of the Roman Empire. A factory, a legitimate factory that was able to produce 4.5 tons of flour every day to be made into bread. There's evidence of grain being hand ground into flour as far back as 23,000 years ago. That's twice as old as the last ice age. So by Roman times, people had really put their noses to the grindstone, if you get what I mean. The techniques of grinding grain into flour had been perfected, but just because something isn't broke doesn't mean you can't improve it 10 billion-fold. So to keep the French people happy with their new short, hairy mafia boss overlords, these guys basically invented the hydraulic press 1,700 years early. So this is how Barbegal was set up. An aqueduct was specifically diverted and made for the express purpose of creating this factory, where there were 16 overshot water wheels. Now today, most water wheels are undershot, as in the water that turns them goes underneath. Here, and you'll see this on many mini golf courses, the water pours over the top to spin them front ways rather than underneath to spin them backwards. It doesn't really matter which way, this is just how it was set up. So the aqueduct split into two and would rush down either side of the hill, where 16 water wheels were set alongside 8 factory buildings. Inside the factory buildings were massive millstones that were automatically grinding grain. Workers simply had to bring in the grain and bring out the flour. This is traditionally called a grist mill, and while the Greek historian Strabo described something similar
Strabo.
And while the Greek historian Strabo described something similar existing in modern-day Turkey about 10 years earlier, it certainly would not have been to the scale of Barbegal. Barbegal might not have been the first of its kind, but it would be the pinnacle of its kind for a very, very long time moving forward in history. Imagine the setup necessary. First of all, this could only have been possible with what is also one of Rome's greatest feats of engineering, their aqueduct system. People smarter than me have done a lot of math to figure out just exactly how Barbegal worked based on the wood fragments and the size of the wheels that are left there and how everything would have been set up at the time. And I've left it all in the description below for people to check out. If you understand all that, I certainly don't. Barbegal is just a treasure trove of ancient technology that we wouldn't be seeing again for genuinely thousands of years. Fortunately for historians, calcium carbonate built up on the wooden water mills that would have been used at the site and basically fossilized them. Makes sense, as that is what will happen to wood that is constantly exposed to running water. These petrified wooden fragments are cut at such exact angles that scientists believe that they are the oldest evidence of mechanical sawing in the ancient world. It is believed that at times when the factory was not needed for processing grain, that pieces would be switched out for turning the circular motion of the water wheels into a back and forth motion for mechanical sawing. This is basically what a sawmill is, and many of them still exist in a very similar setup to this very day. And if this is true, this also makes Barbegal the oldest sawmill in the world by at least 200 years, looking up the oldest sawmills that Wikipedia seemed to list. If you want to know how the circular motion of a water wheel is turned into the back and forth motion needed for mechanical sawing, you can watch this episode of Dr. Stone. And Senku's setup here is dramatically more advanced than anything that they would have had in ancient Rome. Obviously, since in the previous episode he used this same setup for hydroelectric power, which I'm not even going to pretend was anything near the capabilities of even ancient Rome. But the part with the gear with teeth on just one side is the part to remember. One thing that is interesting about it is not all of the mill stones were the same size, and experts believe that this is because Barbegal was a testing site, seeing which of the sizes of stones were the most efficient, and that there were other grist mills set up around the Roman Empire, which would then use whichever size of millstone that Barbegal found was the most efficient design to use as all of their millstones. And it's not just other grist mills around the Roman Empire, there are other dedicated sawmills, not just the replaceable part sawmills that Barbegal was, and other ore crushing mills using the same process. Though none of them were clearly as grandiose as Barbegal, something that you can pretty clearly say was the first factory in history. The modern hydraulic press was invented in 1795 by Joseph Bramond in England, and believe it or not, it actually does have uses other than crushing things in a satisfying way on that one YouTube channel. And while I call Barbegal a hydraulic press, that's not entirely accurate. It does crush things with the power of water, but what the actual invention, the hydraulic press, is very different. Barbegal is a grist mill, using the force of a river to turn giant wheels, while modern hydraulic presses also use the power of water to make mechanical work happen, but they use the pressure of water in a closed system, forcing water from chamber to chamber, basically to move one tiny piston and make that piston move a much larger piston. But just the concept of mechanical work, automation, a factory, the mass production of food, only requiring people to put grain in and get flour out in the Iron Age, is so absurdly ahead of its time, it is hard to put into words. We wouldn't rediscover, and some of it we haven't rediscovered. There are so many feats of Roman engineering that we still don't know how they did them. The most famous examples are like, we don't know how they made their concrete. Roman concrete gets harder and harder and harder as the years go by, while ours crumbles to dust. There's some ingredient in Roman concrete that makes, as the years go by and gravity pulls it down, it gets stronger and stronger. Everything that the Romans built out of concrete is stronger today than the day they built it, stronger today than it was 1,000 years ago, stronger today than it was in the 80s, if I want to bring that joke back. But it's not as though Iron Age technology jumped straight from hand grinding flour to Barbegal. There was experimentation, there were many, many thousands of years of development, and it seemed at the time the step right before Barbegal was animal power. There were mills that were turning these giant millstones using horses and donkeys. As recently as the year 76 AD, we can see a pretty well-preserved example of one of these factories in the one place that preserved ancient Rome very well in the year 76, Pompeii. I can't imagine there were too many places close to modern luxury as the city of Arles, France, in ancient Rome. Clean running water, as much food as you could possibly eat, and the workforce the Romans just built. That's what they did. They built everything. Roads that are still there, buildings that are not falling while the ones we built 30 years ago are crumbling. Grist mills would continue to exist past the Roman Empire, sure, but it would be a very long time before we would have an organized workforce with the people with the scientific knowledge and the drive and the mechanical ability and the free time to be able to create a running factory like we had with Barbegal. Because for much of the next 1400 years, people, families, they just ate what they made. In fact, most of human history, people didn't really have jobs. There were nobility who were fed by their peasants, but the vast majority of humans, you ate what your family made. Everyone on Earth, practically, was a farmer. No careers, there's practically no money. It's just people subsisting off the land they live on. Making food for other people? Well, maybe if you had a surplus on your family farm. We only had this brief reprieve because of the extreme richness of the Roman Empire. And after Rome, technology didn't just stagnate, it went backwards hard. And how exactly did that happen? Well, to get into that, I have to explain the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Do you want the long version or the short version?
Northern barbarians, the Visigoths from this place, which I can't imagine will be of any importance moving forward in history. And more Goth people, the Ostrogoths, a seafaring empire based on the Black Sea. Both tag-teamed the Roman Empire from two different sides, and then Attila the Hun happened, and for the first time in their history they were actively losing battles. The constant state of warfare that Rome subsided in for its whole existence was extremely profitable, provided they were winning. But the second you start losing wars, a losing territory, when your entire business model as a country is to conquer and steal the riches of these new places that you conquer, and now suddenly you're still hemorrhaging money like you always have been, but without conquering new people to pay you more and more? Yeah, that didn't last long. The emperor was split in half in the year 285 AD by Emperor Diocletian, and the Western Roman Empire did not last too terribly long. And seeing as the Western Roman Empire is the part that had Italy in it, and therefore the actual Roman part, that's basically the end of the Roman Empire. The Byzantines called themselves Rome, but that's just... there was no Rome in Rome. Even Germany called itself Rome for a while, which was weird. Everyone just wanted to be the new Roman Empire because it was so grandiose, such a big part of history. And what replaced it was feudal Europe, something that is called the Dark Ages for a very good reason. In Roman times, the circumference of the Earth and the fact that the Earth went around the sun was pretty well known. 1,000 years later, Copernicus tried to say the same thing, and he was put under house arrest by the Catholic Church and charged with heresy. So yes, while that is all seemingly off topic, that is why Barbegal is a full 1,700 years ahead of schedule. We lost so much when Rome fell. And sure, Rome may not have been the most progressive empire that ever existed on the face of the earth, but they were still millennia ahead of the people who replaced them.